Testing. Testing, testing.
All right, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll get things going. Thanks, everyone, for coming out this evening. I want to make a few introductions here. Folks that are with us this evening. Over there we have Pat Overham from ICS. ICS is our facilities consultant. We have Jody Zesbra from Ellers. Ellers is our public finance advisors. We have Jamie Thielen from Sand Companies. Jamie will explain Sand Companies' part in helping us negotiate with the hospital. Our business manager, Sue Clemens, is here. Superintendent Johnson. And then board members, we have Scott Hansen here, Tim Sands, Lynn Penny, Amy Sand, Ozzy's around here somewhere, and Matt Kreitzer. And I'm Don Winkles.
All right, welcome everybody. Those who are here personally, appreciate you coming out on this winter night. And also those who are here digitally, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have an opportunity to share some information with you tonight, some information that we're very excited about. The district wants to be fully transparent and share this information about an opportunity we think will be great for the district. We want to engage the community in the process, and this meeting is the start of that. So we're going to share quite a bit of information throughout this presentation. Mr. Johnson's going to lead us. Throughout the presentation, if questions do come up, we do ask you hold those till the end of the presentation. And for those of you joining us digitally, there's a forum for you to ask questions, and those will be submitted to us also to answer. So if we could hold off to questions on the end, so we can get through all the information to share with you. So again, as Don said, we really appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. And with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Johnson to go through the presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Maybe it was said already, but I do want to point out that we have some roundtables out in the lobby for after the presentation. We'll have staff out there for you to be able to stop and chat with. ICS, Pat will be out there. We'll have our financial advisors. I'll be out there, board members. We have some teachers both in our preschool and kindergarten program as well as our administrators. So not everybody's comfortable asking questions in this format, so feel free to stop us out after the meeting. I was going to ask Cassie, our community ed director, really quick, how many people online attending? 55 virtually, and they will monitor the questions online and share with everybody. Those of you who attended our community meeting earlier this year, some of the information in this presentation is overlapping that. I think it's information that's worth repeating so that folks understand the journey we've been on the past almost 4 years examining our elementary and preschool space. And there's my lead-in. We've been analyzing and talking about this for over 3 years. I can say with confidence it's an extensive examination of our needs and possible solutions. There's no simple path for school districts when it comes to space and facilities. It's always a complex situation, but I can say very exciting. I want to be really clear that there have been no official decisions made by the school board. A lot of discussion, a lot of ideas, a lot of listening, a lot of problem solving and analyzing, but no decisions have been made. Before we move forward with an official decision, it has to be decided on and voted on by the school board. They have to take official action. And it also requires approval by the Minnesota Department of Education. So it's a pretty complicated, complex, thorough process for trying to build a building in a school district. Instead of starting from the beginning, I thought maybe more of an unconventional approach might be, let's start where we're at today. And I think the simplest thing might be, let's address some of the questions that are out there. There are a few questions floating around that I've become aware of, some questions that have been in social media or in the news, and I just want to start with addressing those and having some people speak to that. And I've summarized some of those here. Questions about the purchase price of the hospital, the purchase agreement status, sand company's involvement, what is the decision-making process, what's the asbestos situation at the former hospital, and then what's the process for community voice and input throughout this entire journey. So I'm going to call upon Jamie Thielen from Sand Company. Jamie and his company have been extremely helpful in helping us navigate through this process of working with CHI to get to the point where we're at today. So Jamie, if you don't mind sharing some of that journey and the work you've done.
Sure. Yep, I'm Jamie Thielen with CEO of Sand Companies. And I think it's a good idea just to clarify some questions. We talked about it a lot about it at the prior meeting, but nobody has purchased the hospital at this point. It's still owned by CHI. It is under contract under a purchase agreement. It is completely contingent. All earnest money that is down is completely contingent. If the school district isn't satisfied with environmental conditions, abatement, asbestos, lead paint, anything like that, they get out of the purchase agreement, all earnest money back. Surveys, all those things are all contingent. And then we're also able to add a contingency if the referendum doesn't get approved in in August. There's no obligation to purchase the building. So nothing is at risk. Nobody has purchased anything at this point. So lots of decisions to be made at this to go from here. But it is under contract at this point. And a lot of people have asked what's our motivation, Sand Companies. And it's really easy. I think I mentioned at the last meeting. I mean, I've been in the school district all my life, lived here all my life. 3 kids graduated through the school district. A lot of our employees are in the school district, or have been, or had kids in the school district. That's really our motivation. We're not getting any financial benefit from this. Our goal was to use our expertise to get the building under contract, to give the community an opportunity to look at it and make a decision on it. I think the purchase price, when we started talking about it, was about $1.2 million, and we were able to put it under contract for $400,000, which we think is a pretty good price for that property. And all decisions are yet to be made about it. Like I said, nothing to go from there. The only thing we're looking to do is, when the school district is ready, we're going to sign the purchase agreement over to them, and we'll get reimbursed for our earnest money and the expense we have. The only financial impact related to us is, since we're a broker, we're a real estate broker, there's a real estate brokerage fee that we would get paid from CHI. I haven't mentioned any of this to anybody else, but our intention all along is actually to donate that back to the school district if the referendum gets approved. So that's all it is, and for us, we're a contractor, we're a builder, but we're not building it, we're not designing it, we're just really doing it all for the community. So
That's great news, Jamie. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And just to reiterate that, we're a public entity. We don't get to decide when we get to a point, if the referendum passes and construction begins, we have to work through a public process of approving bids and awarding bids to the lowest bidder. It's not something that we can arbitrarily decide to assign to people because of relationships we have. So that, I just want to be clear about the transparency that takes place when you go through a building project. So again, Jamie, thank you. That's great news. Appreciate your work on behalf of the school district. Again, just to reiterate, that the school district has not made any decision to purchase the hospital. The school district still needs to take a formal vote, probably in February, possibly in March, for those next steps, and then submit a plan off to the Department of Education for approval. If the Department of Education approves the plan and process, and Pat and Jody are experts on this process, we then we will hold another public meeting to review and comment from the state of Minnesota so folks understand what components of our plan are ready to move forward. Asbestos abatement, a lot of talk about asbestos at the hospital. We consult and work with a company called IEA. They're our health and safety consultants. I think their main offices are in Virginia. December 13th and 14th, 12th, or 13th and 14th, they spent 2 days in the hospital walking through the entire hospital looking for asbestos, analyzing the asbestos situation, as well as, like Jamie said, looking at lead paint and any other potential environmental issues. They submitted a report to the district that we have and an estimated cost to address the abatement. I don't want to speak for Pat, and I'm not an expert on asbestos abatement, but you really have 3 options for asbestos. You can remove it, you can leave it. If it's cracked, if it's flaking, you can treat it, you can cover it with a substance that's similar to a thick paint. So you have those 3 options. The initial estimate for asbestos abatement in the hospital is about $320,000 from IEA to come in and take care of that abatement. That would be the first thing that would happen in the construction process. Perspective-wise, $320,000 for asbestos abatement is almost the exact amount of money we spent on asbestos abatement in this building when we constructed and added on to it back in 2015 through 18. So I don't, and Pat again, maybe Pat, now's a good time as our consultant, level of concern or questions in regards to, that you have in regards to abatement.
I think you summarized it well. IEA went through and did their analysis, didn't come back with any surprises. It was very predictable to what we would see. There were some floor tile, there was some ceiling tile, thermal insulation, and some piping insulation, but no, it was right in line with what we had kind of budgeted or assumed all along, so nothing out of the ordinary.
Thank you. And then referendum versus lease levy. Throughout this whole process, we've been analyzing which of these 2 funding mechanisms make the most sense for the community, for our taxpayers, and for our school district. Our initial conversations a year ago were leaning heavy towards a lease levy. Lease levy is something that we can do without board approval. It's something that school districts across the state can do. It's a decision that we would take very seriously. Not giving the community an opportunity to share their voice is something that's of concern to us, and we want to make sure that that's afforded to everyone. The task force of people we've been working with the past 3 or 4 months to look at space and facilities also felt the same way. Not only does that community voice come into play with a referendum vote, but the dollar for dollar impact when you compare a referendum to a lease levy is much more, I think, effective, and you get more for your dollar through a referendum. Jody will speak to that in just a little bit. Here's a little bit of review from the last time. The needs for additional space, again, I've been talking about it. We've been talking about it for 3 or 4 years. I'll show you some statistics in regards to our enrollment and growth, increased special education programming, which has an impact on space, intervention support like Title I, Reading Corps, social emotional support like social workers, psychologists also consume quite a bit of space, and those positions have increased quite a bit over the past 3 or 4 years. It's a primary goal of the school district. We hear it time and time again to maintain low class sizes, and I believe our elementary K through 5 average class size is right at 20 when you average it out across kindergarten through 5th grade. And when our strategic plan was developed over the 2019-2020 school year for the next 5 years, one of the pillars of this strategic plan is to ensure the facilities meet the needs of learners through further exploration of options. What options have been considered? Making sure that we have equitable programming in both communities. Right now, all of our preschool is in Avon. When you look at our 2 communities, we have about a 60-40 split with our population and enrollment. We have about 60% of those students and residents that live in the Albany, more of the Albany area, 40% in the Avon area. 2 times over the past at least 12 years, the school district has had to make a decision to transport students from Albany to Avon because there isn't space here and there is vacant rooms in Avon. We did that prior to the referendum in 2015 with kindergarten, and right now we're doing that with preschool. So the space needs are in Albany, trying to balance that. You know, you'll likely hear me talk about a crystal ball. I'd love to have had a crystal ball, and I think others would too, when you look back even to the 90s, when the school district made a decision to build 2 elementary schools the exact same size in both Avon and Albany. If we'd had a crystal ball, we would have likely made the elementary school in this part of our school district a little bit larger. We brought Pat in, I think it's been at least 2, if not 3 years, working with the school district as an outside set of eyes who works with other school districts to help us navigate through the challenges that we have and help us find solutions. We've asked our community through community surveys, how do you feel about splitting up the school district? Let's have all the preschool through 2nd grade students in one building and the grades 3 through 5 students in a second building. That doesn't buy us much space, and it puts more students on buses. We've looked at changing elementary boundaries, which again doesn't do much. We've looked at further additions to the Albany campus. Right now we added 7 classrooms to that building. That building is at capacity. When you look at the hallways, the support space, the gymnasium, the cafeteria, we cannot put more students in that school, which is why we moved preschool. We have a bus garage that sits in the middle of our campus up here that is an important facility, but sometimes we toy with the idea, would it make sense to move that? That, again, would be an expensive venture for us. And over the past 3 to 4 years, we've had conversations with a couple of business partners who own property in Albany to look at using that lease levy to lease space from them to create space for preschool and kindergarten. And we heard from folks a couple of years ago that was not something that was in the best interest of our district. Why are we here? We understand the important role our district serves in the community. We take that very seriously, and we're proud of it. We cannot stay the same and be successful. There's a quote by Lou Holtz that talks about you either growing or you're dying, and we're in a great situation here. I know school districts, and I talk to superintendents in the state that are in dying school districts because their enrollment is dropping. They're having conversations about how to close schools, and we're having conversations about slow, steady growth. I mentioned enrollment facilities is a part of our strategic plan. We've displaced programs due to lack of space. Preschool and wraparound care is growing. I hear from people, why didn't you think of this in 2014? Why wasn't this addressed then? Again, I wish I had a crystal ball. Within 3 years of that referendum vote, preschool requirements, preschool expectations have increased, and I'll show you that in a slide here in just a second. All preschool program, again, is at Avon, and I've also heard people say, why do you need preschool? Preschool is not required in all cases. Some components of it are, but I'll argue that preschool is essential to our school district's success. Actually, preschool, I think, is one of the most researched programs in a public education system. And the data and evidence to support the positive impacts of preschool and early education always come out to be positive. And it's actually one of the few topics that's more bipartisan than others. You tend to get more Democrats and Republicans on the same page when it comes to supporting our youngest learners. We've surveyed our community over the past few years. Here are some of the key points related to facilities that come from our surveys. Maintain low class sizes. That is number one all the time. Keep students in their community as long as possible, close to their neighborhood school. Limit time on the bus. It's hard to work in a perfect situation with facilities, but no one wants to put their kindergartner on a bus for 45 minutes when they live close to an elementary school. And then I mentioned before, there just isn't a lot of support to split up our elementary schools into different grade levels, and it would not free up space. Why now? I'll jump down to number 3. Our space issues are not going away. I'll be upfront and just clear about our enrollment. Our enrollment in Albany Area Schools is just like every other school district in the country right now because of this pandemic. We saw a dip this year and last year because of some of the fears with families and homeschooling, and to the point where and Sue, you can help me out here, our business manager. I don't know if it was federal or state money that was given to all schools because of declining enrollment impacted by the pandemic. Federal dollars. And I'll show you some enrollment data. This is our preschool data, real simple. This is for a picture of our 4-year-old preschool programming. These are the students just about ready to start kindergarten. The blue bar represents the number of sections that we have for 4-year-olds in our preschool program. And what's typical in Albany is you see up and down. Some years are higher than others, not uncommon. But if you look at the red bar is the number of classrooms that we've needed to support 4-year-olds in our school district, or the number of full days sections. When we passed that referendum in 2014 and 15, we didn't have any 4-year-old 4-day programming. The next year we added 1 section, and you can see by looking at that red bar what happened to the full day 4-year-old programming. I'm going to say that's pretty consistent in probably every district in the state. And again, you see it go up and down depending on the year. When you have elementary schools that are close to capacity, and now you have preschool programming taking classrooms all day, where in the past they used to be able to share space, it's a good thing, but it's problematic. Here's our enrollment. Going back to 2011, what's really nice for us is it's slow and steady. It's not out of control. It's not like some of the suburbs you'd see in the cities, but it's definitely trending upward. Looking ahead, the best that we can do with projections, without a crystal ball, looking at where we're at today and where we intend to be in the future. Our 2 smallest class sizes today, when you look at kindergarten through grade 12, are 11th and 12th grade. That's why big part of why those numbers go up. Our 2 largest cities in our community are extremely helpful in providing data. This is the city of Avon. You can see the blue bar represents their population growth as well as the number of households in the red bar. Slow and steady, just like we see in the school district, and the city of Albany. Same story. District census, when you look at our entire school district, you can see it does go back to 1990, and then it jumps around a little bit. But if you look at, again, that census growth, now that we're birth to age 100 plus, we have over 10,000 people in our school district. I'm going to turn it over to Pat here real quick. Pat's been in the hospital once or twice, walking through it. He touched on asbestos already a little bit. I have a project budget I'll share with you, and then another question we get asked a lot, why not just build a new building? And we can touch on what that looks like. So.
Yep, and I went through some of this information for those of you who were at the first community meeting, but just to give you a bit of a feel, again, a few of us have been through the building several times, and as some of you may be aware, the original structure is a 1968 building. The addition was done in the early 2000s. A couple of small additions and renovations that took place at that time as well. So the clinic portion, or the front portion, is the most current of the facility. A couple things of note, and we did mention this before. The building, especially the original part of the building, is a very heavy structure, and so it's stout. It's a rock-solid building. much more so than some of the buildings that we see constructed today. Definitely some age in systems and infrastructure and certain characteristics of the building, as you might imagine. Mechanical systems, the boilers, some of the windows, those types of things. There are definitely some maintenance needs in the building, but we definitely see it as a real good opportunity to revitalize an asset in the community. What was put up here is just kind of a conceptual, what we call a program diagram. And really it's a fit plan at this point to try to identify what would we be able to look at for spaces, whether they're traditional classrooms or specialist areas, support spaces like office and conference rooms and toilet rooms and those types of things. Definitely not to be taken literal. If things are approved, the next step is really to sit down with staff and others to further develop and refine, layouts and adjacencies and configurations and so on. But you can see the main entry of the hospital the clinic there on the left of the slide. And really what the current plan proposes to do is take advantage of the main floor of the building throughout the new and the original portions, and then considers adding a multi-purpose space to the plan northeast of the building to be used for large motor skills and breakout and cafeteria and all sorts of different student-related activities.
I just wanted to jump to that real quick. Some people had asked, what does multi-purpose activities space mean? It's a gymnasium that won't be used as a traditional gymnasium. And this is the best conceptual planning that we have today. When you think about the needs of 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds, they need to be active. And it's hard to do that in a classroom. And we have preschool teachers here nodding their heads that definitely is the case. And so for us to have a space dedicated to 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds where they can be active, they can move, they can work on small and fine and large gross motor skills. We know of districts that have this type of equipment. We can't have that in our schools today. This would be a dedicated space for our youngest learners. It would also be a space, top right-hand corner is a picture of some cafeteria tables. It would be a flexible space for our students. Want to talk?
Sure, you can see kind of a concept rendering there, and for those of you who are familiar with the site, it's a little over a 6-acre site, obviously adjacent to, I think upwards of, is it about 45 acres of city-owned land and the 58? Okay, I was undershooting there. So plenty of potential for shared uses of what's a great centrally located site in town. Again, you can see how it's configured just up from the lake, where the proposed multi-purpose space is considered to be added and how things would be accessed.
This is just a...
Yeah, just a rendering of the front entry. Again, concept to try to give you a feel for what that facility could be. Again, not a lot of work would need to happen to have the facility transitioned into a really cool asset for the district.
Just to touch on some of the things that Pat talked about, again, our needs are in Albany, structurally solid building, it's affordable. You heard that from Jamie. 6 acres is a nice amount of property with some green space, and the amenities are really something that is important to have, and you can see those listed from parking lots to a adjacent playground. We've talked a lot about, and we've heard this from some of our residents, the option for a second entrance. We're working with the city to determine what options exist for that. And I think overall it's a cost-effective solution. Pat showed you 16 classrooms. 16 classrooms added to our school district is a significant impact, not only supporting preschool and kindergarten, but it will free up space at both elementary schools. 4 to 5 classrooms in each building, which is about 80 to 100 students at each one of those schools.
So just to give a high-level overview of the budget, you can see things kind of broken down into what we consider straight construction costs for the remodel and renovation and infrastructure improvements. New construction is what it would take to create that multi-purpose space, and all the other project-related costs that go along with any type of project like this: furniture, fixtures, equipment, technology, acquisition of the property has been budgeted, as Jamie referenced earlier. All of the design and architecture and engineering, state and local plan reviews, permits and fees, conservative project contingency at this point. And right now we're sitting at about $14.8 million as a conservative conceptual budget for the project. A couple things of note: we talked about the fact that this does include that $320,000 line item that would accomplish all the asbestos and hazardous material abatement and some of the demolition work. And several weeks ago I was asked to kind of contemplate what it would take to build a similar or comparable facility from the ground up. And you know, obviously a lot of factors go into that, but that number resulted in a total that was pushing 26 to 27 million. One of the things with the hospital site that can often get overlooked is all of the existing infrastructure that's there. Think about the site development and the parking and the utilities and all of those things that are already there and exist and would not have to be replicated. So, let alone the bones of the building that are clearly of substantial value.
Thanks, Pat.
Yep.
And again, Pat will be in the lobby he'll have this information as well as fielding questions. I'd like to ask Jody to come forward and talk a little bit about and I have the information on the next slide, but a little bit of what the approval process looks like. And Jody, you work with districts all over the state on similar projects, and what information you have helpful for us tonight.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you. So bond rates, I see, is the first item listed on there. We have been selling bonds for districts who had successful bond referendum elections in November and have been getting a lot of demand for municipal bonds, really nice low interest rates. They have been creeping up a little bit, but even this week we sold 20-year bonds at 2.21% for Lake Park Audubon. So districts are fortunate in that they can issue with tax-exempt rates. It's general obligation debt, so very safe, so really garners nice low rates in the market. The approval process, as Greg mentioned, you would need to submit the information to the Department of Education for approval, and then after that approval, you're really good to go. You would put it on the bond, you put it on the election on the ballot in August 9th is the date for elections this year, and then assuming approval by the voters, then we would likely issue the bonds by early November. So that's kind of the time frame as far as how the process plays out.
I had another question and I lost it, Jody. What's it look like from your standpoint in the state of Minnesota? This doesn't really impact Albany, but curious, when you look at, we're looking at potentially an August election, what does it look like in the state for August in school districts?
There's a number of elections that districts are considering for August because there's limited dates when you can ask your voters for a bond referendum, and some of those dates were eliminated this last year because of the redistricting and the census process. So normally school districts can request bond referendum votes in February, April, May, August, and November, general election days, so 5 days every year. This year, districts were limited to February, August, and November. So a lot of districts that were planning and hoping to do something this spring have been holding off and waiting to ask their voters until the August election date. November is a gubernatorial election, so I think a lot of school districts are a little worried that they would have a hard time getting their message out, and so really looking toward that August date.
Jody, you have a document that you'll have out in the lobby. It's a pretty comprehensive financial document that shows the impact on different residential homes, commercial, ag property, seasonal property, et cetera. I didn't want to put the whole document up, so I just pulled the scenario of what a $200,000 home would look like in Albany. And you'll notice the number 15.2, Pat had 14.8, but as we work through the bond, there are fees associated with that. So the actual ask, if we move ahead with the plan that we're presenting tonight, would be 15.2 million.
Correct. And one of the differences between the 14.8 and 15.2, we have included in that 15.2 about 200,000 toward the first interest payment that would be due, cost of issuance, and then because it would be a competitively bid, there's an underwriter's discount that's generally included in that number. So those are the differences between the 14.8 of project construction costs and then what we ultimately think would be included on the ballot at the 15.2. And we'll continue to refine those estimates as we go forward before the board would take any action, but that $79 a year does include cushion as compared to what interest rates are now, because we don't know what they'll be when we would sell the bonds in early November, so we definitely want to be on the conservative end, just like on the construction side, as Pat mentioned, they've got a conservative contingency built in. We do build contingency into the interest rate too, just to make sure we'll be able to meet that property tax impact estimate.
Thanks, Jody. I want to get this on everyone's radar, and I think if you've been listening and a part of some of our discussions lately, we're presenting a building bond proposal to you tonight, but I also want you to be aware of the operating expenses concern that we have as a school district. You'll notice one of the last bullets, it says board discussion. Our school board still needs to have discussion about how we address ongoing operating expenses within the school district. Right now, our district does not have a voter-approved operating levy. 75% of districts in the state do have a voter-approved operating levy. Last time we asked our voters to approve, and one was approved, it was 2005. So we've been, and that expired in, I think it was a 10-year, I'm assuming it was a 10-year operating levy. And we've been able to maintain, to be frugal, to do the best with the resources that we have because of some of the things that have happened in our school district, like the referendum in 2015. We used some of those resources to purchase buses, to purchase technology. That took pressure off of our operating expenses in general fund. And we've received COVID dollars the last 2 years to help us get through the pandemic. That's helped us purchase and pay for additional staff to support our students. The bottom number, I shared this at the last meeting, when you look at school districts in the state of Minnesota, there are 327 school districts. When you look at the operating general ed revenue that school districts receive, Albany is ranked 279 out of 327. So again, the board still needs to have that discussion about operating expenses. They're not going away. And I'm optimistic. Listening to our governor right now, I know not everyone's a fan of the governor, but definitely supporting education, and that helps us buy more time each year. Talked for about 40 minutes, and I just want to review real quick our roundtables. They'll be out in the lobby. Feel free to stop and ask questions. And I want to turn it over to you folks. So we'll have a few board members spread out with microphones. If you have a question, raise your hand, and they'll come over and share the mic with you, and we'll do our best to answer the questions. We do have some questions online, so we'll go ahead, sir.
That bond referendum, how many years is that going to affect the taxpayers?
Great question.
So we have it set up as a 20-year bond, and that's important because if you have a 20-year bond schedule, then you can qualify for state aid. Right now, the district doesn't qualify for any, but it's certainly possible that you could in the future. So the state requires a 20-year schedule in order for you to qualify for any state aid in the future.
Thanks, Jody. We're going to ask if you please use the mic. So Scott, can you, or someone right in the middle, Lauren, that way people online can hear the questions.
If you go ahead with it, did you project of how long before we have to build again?
Great question, Lauren. And maybe our board members can chime in on this too, and short of a crystal ball, different things can come in and impact. The short answer is, I would think that based on our enrollment being slow and steady, without any significant changes from the state or federal government saying they're going to mandate something that we have to do that we're not prepared to do, I would anticipate this is going to make it at least 10 years for us. And board members, I don't know your thoughts on that.
Excuse me, I would agree with Greg. I think that this plan would give us flexibility and a little bit of room to breathe at the Avon Elementary, Albany Elementary, and at this facility. When we're full, then we make some changes. We've done it in Albany, where we moved the preschoolers over to Avon. It gets us a couple more years. So I think 10 years, I think, is a very reasonable number.
I want to point out too, and I didn't share it before, the board closed open enrollment 2 years ago. 3 years ago, they closed open enrollment initially for grades K through 8. I think maybe a couple of elementary grades even before that. But right now, the past 2 years, we've been completely closed K through 12. We get calls all the time in the district office. Our principals get contacted on a regular basis from people that live in surrounding communities wanting to open enroll, and we do not do that. We do not send buses out deep into other school districts to transport students. We've limited that to protect our enrollment, so to speak. Thanks for the question.
Greg, I think we have one online too.
Will the new space be fully staffed? Social workers, music, FIAD, admin, kitchen? Or will that building have to share staff from the other elementaries?
Yeah, we've experimented with shared staff in the past, and it doesn't work well. It's a way to save dollars, but we've always been good at being frugal and making things work. And the good thing with this plan is we have existing kindergarten teachers, we have existing preschool teachers, we have existing preschool support staff. We will be able to transfer those staff into that building to support our students. In many ways, and I think some of our preschool teachers can attest to this, I think we can even be a little bit more efficient when you don't have people running between two different facilities. So I'm not going to lie that there will be some increased operating expenses, likely with custodial, with an additional space, but as far as other support of our staff and students, it will be minimal.
You said that there were 3 options for the asbestos. Which option are we doing? Are you going to get rid of it or fix it or what?
Great question. All of the asbestos, the way the report is written, is recommended to be remediated. And so there are certain situations where you could encapsulate it. For instance, VAT, 9x9 floor tile. Oftentimes, believe it or not, that tile is incredible and is stuck down forever, and districts will choose to just encapsulate it by flooring over the top of it. Everything right now conceptually will be removed. And there's a process for doing air monitoring and so on after that remediation.
In the back.
Greg, you indicated that there was an advantage to going with the referendum financially as compared to a lease, but you also indicated that there was, I believe, $400,000 additional cost with the referendum. So how would a lease compare with the referendum in terms of cost?
That's a great question, and I think I'll turn it over to Jody.
So I mentioned that your bonds would be general obligation debt. Lease levies are not, or lease purchase financing is not general obligation debt. It's considered annual appropriation debt, so it demands a higher interest rate. It also does not qualify for the school building bond agricultural credit. So really important to the owners of agricultural property that if a bond is issued, then they would receive that 70% credit is what it will be for taxes payable in '23 on the debt service levy for any school building bond debt service levies. So, was there another question?
And Jody,
as
I
part of
think
that?
the other part, Jody,
Oh.
is the bonds also qualify for equalization, correct?
They would, yes. But I don't think there's a $400,000 difference in cost between the two. I think we would be looking at about the same level of financing for both of those options.
Well, I thought you indicated the construction was going to be 14.8, but you were going to have a referendum for 15.2.
Right, but even with lease purchase financing, we'd have financing costs associated with that also. So when we took a look at the lease purchase options, we were also considering financing costs as part of those. I don't think we had the breakdown here with us tonight. So either option has financing costs associated with it because you're going to be either issuing lease purchase financing through a direct placement with a financial institution or issuing certificates of participation. They're similar to bonds. You'll have financing costs associated with whatever option you decide to go with.
But what would be the net difference?
I don't think there would be much of a difference at all between the two options.
So the amount, when we're talking a lease levy, we could levy X amount of dollars, which I think, what was the number,
4.6 was the max, 4.6 million.
Yeah, that's the maximum that you have available to you within the formula that the state provides for lease levy financing. So you can only access financing up to about 4.6 million. I think that was the other hurdle with the lease levy.
The other thing that, so I mentioned equalization, and I'm not sure if everybody understands what equalization is, so just a real quick, to come back to that. When we go out, if we were to go out for a lease levy is, the burden is upon the taxpayers within the district. So whatever amount we would do in a lease levy would be taxes directly paid by our residents within the district. When you go out for a bond, the state kicks in a certain percentage of that. So our taxpayers are responsible. Jody, is it?
So right now, the only state aid that you're getting on your bonds is the aid credit. You're not getting any direct state debt equalization aid anymore because your tax base has grown and you've kind of outpaced the amount that you were eligible for before.
Okay, thank you. So ag land would get a credit.
Yes,
Okay.
and right now it's at a 60% level, scheduled to go up to 70% next year. So ag property owners should have definitely seen some relief in their property taxes as that ag credit has phased in over the last few years. It's been significant and it's automatic. You don't need to request that refund. It's just automatically deducted as part of your property tax statement.
Just to point out real quick, we're averaging about 97 to 100 people virtually tuned into the meeting, just so you know there's a big audience watching as well. Any other questions?
Just curious on the timeline from start to projected finish.
Sure. So assuming an August referendum vote, after the successful vote, that design phase would typically, on a project like this, be a 4 to 6 month process. Then you're going through the public bidding and procurement. Construction is probably about a 10-month duration, and so long story long, the target would actually be occupancy for fall of '24. We wouldn't be in time to get in there in fall of '23.
In giving consideration to, existing bones of buildings, et cetera, that it's best to maybe add on to that with that hospital structure. Can you give us a comparison cost of adding on to the Avon School then? Because they already have a gymnasium, a cafeteria, they have staff, perhaps the lack of needing to hire additional custodial.
Good question. Thank you. So if we, and maybe I'll let, Pat's already grabbing his microphone. If if we were to add 7 rooms onto Avon Elementary, and we've learned through experience that 7 rooms on Albany Elementary is a good thing, but it puts that building at capacity. When you, again, gymnasium, cafeteria, the hallways in our elementary schools are extremely small. Really concerned about safety issues. But Pat, go ahead.
Yep, so to look at a 6 or 8, 7, well, 7 was the question, classroom addition to that facility, it's probably in the $4 to $4.5 million range with some of the current requirements. Again, kind of apples and oranges comparison, but that's certainly a solution that could be considered to meet some of your short-term needs. And again, the more you add on to those buildings, you're going to start being extremely cramped with those core spaces of kitchen, cafeteria, gymnasium, all of the support spaces, even the corridor widths to try to accommodate more kids.
And then I think apples to apples, if we're going to try to replicate this, we put 16 rooms on Avon Elementary. Now you're looking at, we've got to have another gym space. That's going to drive the price up and the other supporting spaces. And again, it goes back to the original problem we have right now. Our students are here, transporting students back and forth on buses. We've been doing that and would prefer not to have those expenses either. Thank you for the question.
If the referendum passes, what would happen to the existing rooms that you're using for preschool in Avon and Albany?
That's a great question. Our principals and some of their staff have been looking at use within those buildings. And they're going to have to chime in for me, but we're really trying to think outside the box. So are there some things that we can do? Avon Elementary is a great example. So how could we replicate some of the things that we hope to do at the early childhood center that we'd have here? How could we do that in Avon? Because we will still keep a couple of sections of preschool at Avon to support those 4-year-olds who are in that community. We don't want to reverse the problem with students on the bus, but our principals are here. Shout out, what are some of those things just initially? Well, right now you have people, and I know you have people working in closets and sharing space. We'd be able to spread out a little bit. Do we have a mic that, yeah, thank you.
We have students working with adults in every single hallway pod area, which isn't ideal for our learners. We would be able to take some of those classrooms and split them up with dividers and have some of those small groups in those classrooms. And we, then it would open up our hallway space a little bit more. It would be better, more conducive to the learners.
And then Avon, I know, looking at some of those flexible space, more creative, call it STEM, call it STEAM, play areas for students to be able to extend learning. And again, expand and grow. I know in Avon Estates is adding another apartment building, as well as 30 to 40 lots are open. We'll watch and see how that impacts our enrollment.
Hey, Greg, thanks for the time. If everybody could, I think it's nice. My name is Brian Schiffler, for those of you who don't know a little bit, so we know who's speaking a little bit, because I know a lot of people here, but not all of you, so it's always nice to know where the input's coming from a little bit. But one of my concerns, Greg, again, lifelong resident of the area, when we had the first building, or the last building expansion, one of our big concerns were to making sure when we're done with this thing that we're not going to get tacked with an operating levy 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, kind of knowing that we're going to have that shortfall. So you guys did a great job of managing that over this last expansion we did. So I know there was a little bit of discussion in earlier meetings a little bit that there's a potential of doing an operating levy also in a 2-part question possibly. So I have a little concern, is that, are we close to that scenario again? Because, if it's the last thing the taxpayers want to see is we pass this thing and we go out there and fight for it and get it, and then 2 or 3 years later we get zapped with an operating levy, going like, ooh, couldn't we see this coming? So, question.
Yeah, great question, Brian. And like I said earlier, we've tried to be as frugal as we can with the budget, limited budget that we do have. I know that there are some surrounding communities. I can use New London Spicer as an example. New London built almost identical to what Albany built a year after we did. They went to their voters this fall and asked for, I think it was $1,000 per student in operating dollars to be able to do the things they need to do as a school district. We've talked a lot as a school board in a school district that we're going to have to at some point. But when we have a referendum in 2015 and we have the wherewithal to buy some buses and to buy some technology to save our general fund, we received COVID dollars the past 2 years. That's helped us buy time. And then, Sue, you have to help me out here, 2014 or 15, local option revenue was a component where school districts could levy up to $724 per pupil without a voter-approved levy, and we were able to capitalize that. You know, our budget is 80% people. We're a people-orientated business, and yeah, I think, and board members chime in, please, there are always ways to continue to keep costs down, and I think we do a good job of that. Again, we had talked a month or two ago really strongly about looking at an operating levy right now, and I think as we've listened to people in the community, there's a little bit of concern about that and the tax impact of both questions coming forward. And that's the thing the board needs to discuss in the next 2 months, is what will come to our voters. And this type of feedback, Brian, is valuable.
I think, Greg, it was brought up, I think, over here about more personnel or more people that are needed to operate that school. Can you speak on that for a little bit? I know we discussed it earlier.
Yeah, for sure, custodial staff. You know, I don't want to raise anyone's anxiety. Staff in this room right now, that they may be transferred to a different building, but we do have staff capacity within the district right now, and as we move 180 students to a new location, staff will go with those folks to support the programming that's there. So there will be some increases. We can't transfer custodians that are needed in other buildings, so there'll be an added cost, but I don't see that as significant. Obviously, there'll be the utility piece that will come into play.
I wanted to, there was someone had mentioned adding on to the Avon Elementary 7 classrooms there. When we passed our last referendum, if you remember, we were transporting our kindergartners to Avon, and we committed to them that with this addition, we wouldn't be transporting from Albany to Avon anymore for kindergarten. So to add on 7 classrooms in Avon, when we're busting at the seams in Albany, is going to force us to move kindergarten to Avon, and we've committed to our taxpayers the last time around that we weren't going to do that anymore. So our space crunch is in Albany. That's where we need to address it.
We got a question over here.
Another concern a little bit with the design for the hospital a little bit. There's a tremendous asset, like you talked about earlier in reference to the additional real estate that's around the property that the city owns to expand potential fields, a lot of things that would facilitate and help with future needs for the school district that I think would be great for the city and the school. But one of my concerns was when we built this last addition onto this school, we generated and we had some dialogue about it prior to getting construction underway a little bit, but we kind of missed it a little bit, was traffic flow, and it created a real problem for the city with our traffic flow and how that was redesigned. So one of my other concerns with the hospital location is on that one entrance that I think that's another challenge that I think needs to be addressed also, that I think may be an additional cost to this project because I think it's really important to get another entrance into the site. because I think it will generate some bottlenecks for the city a little bit that I think we could alleviate that by putting another roadway into there, whether that's coming off of 238 or wherever it may be coming off of. But I think that is a concern for the city, that in the future, because again, especially if there is some ability to add on to that property at somewhere down the road, if there's a little extra real estate there and we do some expanding for other programs or other things that may be in that facility, that there's some better access in and out of there a little bit. So that would be something that I would like to see addressed from a standpoint of, are there some options on generating another access to that site and to alleviate some of this flow problem with traffic?
That's a really good point, Brian. We do have an issue, I think, around all of our schools at 8 a.m. and at 3 p.m. And I think every school district probably around has to deal with the same issue. We did compound that a little bit here. You're right. We did change the traffic flow on campus to create a safer environment as buses go in and out and 16 to 18-year-olds leave with their vehicles. And I know our police department has monitored that closely, and no one wants to sit and wait. I'd argue, I won't say anything about that intersection over here, but that intersection, I know the city has a plan to address, and I think that'll help. Shifting some students, you know, if we shift kindergarten off of this campus, that will, I don't know that it will be significant, but we'll see some lightening of traffic flow in that area. And I'm with you, Brian. I agree wholeheartedly, and I think the board does too, that a second entrance on that campus, if this goes through, is important. Now, in working with Tom Schneider at the city, you know, there are some hurdles we have to get over with the DNR, and some of that property is federal property. And I think there's some ways that we can manage it so that we create a safe environment as well as a convenient environment for families, and also the concerns of neighbors that live in the area. If we have two entrances at drop-off and pickup time, that helps a lot.
Greg, in the task force meetings, you showed us a projected cost, like you did here tonight, with a $200,000 home being $79 a year. In the task force you showed us, I know it's not in the best interest of the board to do a lease levy, but I think it's important for the public and the community listening to know the difference between the cost of a $200,000 home on a lease levy compared to a referendum passed. You know, I don't think community members understand that, or not all community members understand that with a lease levy, you'll be paying taxes on the building as well, where if it's owned by the school, you're tax exempt. You know, there's also added costs that people don't understand with a lease levy that make it significantly more expensive per household.
That's a really good point, and that's why lease levy is certainly a tempting option for school districts, but something that takes away that voice in the community. And Jody did a good job of talking about how that lease levy looks different and how it impacts communities and how there's less aid and support for that. But you saw this, what was it, $79 on a $200,000 home. For $4.6 million on that same $200,000 home, it's $56 a year. You can do the math pretty quickly and see that it's not anywhere close dollar for dollar. Thanks for that question.
I think, Greg, if we can mention real quick, if, you know, this building goes through, we're still going to have pre-K at Avon. I mean, that's not going away. We're not taking that from that community, from that area, or that part of our district. We're still going to have that so people can still go bring their kids to the closest elementary school.
Correct. Now, it's going to depend on how many students we enroll in those programs, but right now I think we're focused on our 4-year-olds, that transition, so a 4-year-old who's preparing for kindergarten is in that building that they'll be going to when they're 5. We need further discussions about some of the 3-year-old support that we do offer.
In taking a look at the diagram up there, back in October when we attended the meeting, there was additional classroom space being built, and it's not shown on this diagram here. Can you explain that? Are they not going to be building additional classrooms, or what?
Thank you for that question. When we were here in October, we had a building plan, a blueprint that had 13 classrooms in the building. We've been able to make some changes to that, and you saw earlier that floor plan now has 16 rooms. So by having 16 rooms at the hospital, we feel, the board feels, our administrative team feels that adding another, I think we were talking about 4 rooms or 8 rooms onto the hospital is not necessary at this time. Yeah, I think I heard the question. Are we projecting, are we going to need it in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? I don't think we will. What option it does give us is there's room to add it on to the south side, and by not touching our lease levy, there's always that option to be able to utilize. I don't believe we're going to have to do that. You're going to, if we do, you'll remind me of that. Hopefully I'm still here in 5 years or 7 years, that we needed to add on, but with 16 additional rooms and quite a bit of support space within that building for small group breakout, that will be a significant impact to our space problem. Can you, so people can hear online, thank you.
Sorry, thank you. So what did they do differently in this plan of what we're seeing versus what was presented to us in October? How did they come up with more classroom space now by not even adding on what was originally proposed in October? That is my question.
Yeah, and I can take that one. Good question. So on the previous diagram, we contemplated a 4 or 8 classroom addition on the south side, and that multi-purpose space was considered to be future. And so internal to the building, we had a multi-use space carved out for all of those things: large motor, small motor, assembly, breakout, cafeteria, all of those things were inside the building. So once the move was made to include that multi-purpose space, it freed up internal space such that we could add those additional classrooms within the building.
And one point on the safety aspect for these children, if this does go through, how about that holding pond down there and the North Lake? Now, their little kids get away from the adults once in a while, and what happens if they go down there and happen to fall in? Who's liable on that end?
That's a great question. That's come up in discussions with our staff as we've talked about the concerns. And in a previous job as an elementary principal, I worked at a school that had 3 holding ponds surrounding that elementary school, K through 4 students. And so it's a real issue. And it boils down to supervision. It boils down to, I don't want to say here today that there's any fencing that is going to need to be added to that area, but that is a significant concern and area of focus for us as we have children on that playground. We have children potentially that could walk to school in close proximity, so that we haven't quite put the final details to that, but it is undoubtedly on our radar and concerning.
With that, you know, that beautiful North Lake that we do have, the walking path, if we were to have to put fencing up alongside that shoreline, that would totally destroy the natural effects of what we have currently. And that parkland that was donated by the Ray Ranke family how many years ago, I don't think we're doing justice to their legacy if we're going to be selling parkland to the school of what was intended for the entire Albany residential area.
I don't want to speak for Tom, but I know that there are some federal issues with the land that we have to be real cognizant of, but we're going to work with the city on making sure that we're not doing anything we shouldn't be doing. I know for a fact, but Tom, go ahead.
I'm not sure what you were talking about, the school buying land or the city selling land. We wouldn't be, there's no land for the city to sell.
In the last meeting, it was mentioned that the city would be selling a portion of that park to the school for the playground area.
I don't
Did we
recall it.
misunderstand that?
You misunderstood it because it's a very complicated process for that property to be sold. It was purchased years ago at federal and state dollars, and you'd have to purchase property 2-to-1, get appraisals, surveys to see and make sure that the property is equal value, that we would be purchasing somewhere else. But it's unlikely that we would go down that path. We tried it years ago, just east of the Bob Havard property along there, when Bob Brenny was mayor, and it went nowhere with the state, because they're the ultimate, they would have to approve everything, and it's unlikely that that would happen. Where that pond sits, that's on hospital property. We have a permanent easement for that. Where the soccer fields are? Oh. No. I wouldn't be in favor of it. A street or Second Avenue, any road construction or new construction within that park property has to get approved by the state. So we kind of have a minimum maintenance road already going through the park to Highway 238. It's in the northeast corner of the existing hospital parking lot, where city trucks and police officers drive through that park to go to 238. Could that be the second access? I don't know. I'd have to ask the state of Minnesota what they think about that idea for a second access. I don't know tonight where
But
that's at.
Tom, don't you think that when we're talking, let's say a school goes in there, we're talking fire safety, we're talking police safety, our access, if that one road is closed off, the state's going to be a little more, I don't want to say lenient, but a little more apt to say, absolutely, let's get a second entrance into that school because of those things.
Yeah, and the other possibility, it could go north to Siouxline Avenue too. I'm not sure, but it hasn't been decided yet. But to answer your question, I'm not aware that the school's looking to buy more property up there, park property. I'm not aware of that.
There's a 10-second pause, so I just want to say thank you for your engagement, your willingness to come out and participate in this. I anticipate we'll do it again. These plans will be fine-tuned. We'll communicate that with you folks, and really do appreciate the support of the schools. And we take the decisions that the board makes very seriously, and the impact that they have on all of you. So have a great night. Stop out to the tables and ask some questions of board members. Myself, Pat, Jody, Jamie will be out there as well. Thank you.